October always feels like thin glass to me, clear enough to see through, fragile enough to crack with a breath. Where I live, the days come early and leave abruptly, and in that brief dusk, when lights flicker and windows become mirrors, the border between what we keep inside and what waits outside loosens like a knot at the end of a rope. I was taught to call it many things: superstition, season, suggestion, but I know it in my body as a pressure at the base of the skull, a chill in the sternum, a subtle tilt in the air that makes every shadow look as if it's listening. If you have ever called out to something you could not name, if you have ever been tempted by the kind of game children whisper about in church courtyards, if you have worn the weight of an object you did not understand but could not put down, I'm asking you to stop listening here. I'm saying this for your good and for mine. There are stories that behave like mirrors. When you enter them, they begin to watch you back. And there are other stories, the ones I'm about to tell, that behave like doors. The hinge creaks just once. After that, it's on you. It began, or maybe it only revealed itself, the night I heard a sound that should have been ordinary. A tap, light as a fingernail against glass. I was home, and the apartment smelled like clean tile and damp toothpaste and the lemon detergent my mother uses out of devotion rather than brand loyalty. The sound came from the bathroom. I stood in the hallway with the light off, so the only illumination was the blue square of the phone in my hand. I waited. Nothing. When I finally flicked on the light and looked in the mirror above the sink, my face looked back with the wrong rhythm, as if I were a half-second out of step with myself. I blamed it on the light. I blamed it on the day. I have always been good at blaming, but that night was only a symptom. The illness, if you want to call it that, had been incubating for years. It lives for me in 3 strands that coil around one another like old rope soaked in seawater. The game my brother and I played when I was 10 years old, the mirror my mother and I returned to the ground where it belonged, and the house by the sea that never wanted visitors and still found ways to speak. I have held each of these apart for a long time, pretending they are not connected. I'm done pretending. All 3 share a voice, a woman's voice that does not bother with words, a long plaint that isn't language but pressure, the way a violin string hums when another string sings nearby. If you've heard it, you don't confuse it with wind or plumbing or the complaints of old wood. It reaches under the skin and makes a place for itself. I'm going to tell you about each strand, but not as a collector of curiosities. I will tell you as the person who carried them. On my back, in my pocket, under my tongue. The first time I understood how stories travel from one mouth to another like breath on a window was at my grandfather's table. He had a habit of letting his coffee go cold. He would sit with the cup cupped between his palms, steam thinning into a thread, eyes turned to a horizon that belonged to another town. His town, where the air was salt and the wooden houses slouched together as if sharing a secret. That afternoon he said quietly that some places ask to be passed by. Not because they're dangerous, though danger is part of it, but because they're heavy in a way that drags at your heart as you walk. There was a house like that at the end of a sand road, he said, and there was a man who guarded it with his eyes. People thought he was cruel. Later they said he was mad. He was neither. He was a keeper, and he kept something he should never have been asked to keep. I will get there. Before I do, I want you to feel what October feels like for me, what a threshold feels like when it thins. When I'm alone at night, the building becomes a body. The elevator cable hums like a throat clearing. The stairwell exhales with each door that snicks shut. There is a particular smell that arrives around 1 a.m. Not the neighbors cooking, not the hallway's disinfectant, but a layered scent like damp stone over dry dust, like a cellar that forgot its fruit. If you pay attention, you discover smells are timekeepers. The lemon detergent is evening. The cold metal of the tap is midnight. The damp stone is the hour when something else begins to breathe. I don't want to dress my fear in fancy names. People talk about hauntings and rituals and signs, and sometimes that language is useful. Other times it is a net with too wide a weave. The truth is simpler and worse. We inherit things we did not choose. Some families pass down china plates or songs. Mine passes down rules. Don't look into mirrors after midnight, especially not if you've been weeping. Don't bring home what isn't given directly to you, and if it's given, ask why. Don't play questions with coins or cards in holy places. Don't go alone to the water after dark. Don't. I have broken each of these to my cost. When I close my eyes now, I can still hear the small click, a nail, a ring, a knuckle against glass. I see too the way my reflection delayed itself in the mirror above the sink, not much, just enough to turn my own face into a stranger. I thought then that I was tired, or that my mind, fogged by a day of obligations and the cruel blue light of screens, had lagged behind my muscles. It took me longer than it should have to remember the mirror that wasn't in my bathroom at all, the one wrapped once in red velvet and once in earth, the one that had found my name before I ever found it. It took me longer still to admit that the first doorway I stepped through wasn't a mirror's mouth but the circle of children on a wooden platform behind a church, a coin winking at me like an eye. There is one more thing I should say before we begin in earnest. If you have ever half woken to a voice and then lost it as you rose into day, you know the trick time plays. You know how thresholds are not just places but moments, between sleep and waking, between breath in and breath out, between the joke and the apology. The voice, I mean, lives in thresholds. I have learned to fear the in-between more than the after or the before. If you keep listening, I will take you there, and I will try as best I can to bring you back. This is not a ghost story that asks you to believe. This is a confession that asks you to remember. Remember how your own life has places that ask to be passed by. Remember the rules you were given and when you broke them. Remember the sound of tapping, once, twice, patient as rain on a window, and how you told yourself it was nothing at all. If you can remember that, you will understand what happened to my aunt's mirror and to the house by the sea and to the coin that said yes when I needed it to say no. You will understand how the same voice can move from glass to wood to salt and never change its pitch. And you will understand why tonight, when the hour turns thin, I will say the same warning my mother said to me, the one I am saying to you now. There are things we do not touch, even if we do not believe in them. Especially then. When my aunt died, she left behind very little, a house that smelled of closed windows, drawers that sighed when opened, and a silence that seemed rehearsed. My mother said she had always been that way, private, solemn, with the kind of gaze that could make you feel as if you'd walked into a room uninvited. We weren't close. I saw her only on birthdays and holidays, and even then she spoke sparingly, as though every word cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. After the funeral, when the black ribbon still hung from the gate and the mirrors were covered with white cloth as our tradition demands, I volunteered to help clean the house. It wasn't obligation. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt for never having asked her much while she was alive. The air inside was stale, like an old prayer folded too many times. I started with her bedroom. The curtains were thick with dust, their edges stiff from years of sun. The furniture was heavy, carved from wood so old it seemed to hum when I touched it. Her dresser was the kind you no longer see, solid, with drawers that resisted before giving way. I pulled them out one by one, expecting the usual. Old clothes, letters, a scent of perfume gone sour. But the last drawer, the one near the bottom, made a hollow sound when I pushed against its back. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The sound of emptiness behind wood. I ran my fingers along the base until I found a lip, then pried it up. Beneath the false bottom lay a small object, wrapped in a piece of red velvet, tied with a strip of dark leather. The sight of it stirred something in me. It wasn't fear at first, just a peculiar recognition, as if I were looking at an old photograph of myself in another life. The leather strip was worn, almost brittle, but still strong enough to hold the bundle tight. When I turned it in my hand, I saw letters carved into the strap, my full name. Not just my first name, but all of it, carved deeply, precisely as though by someone who had taken great care. I froze. My aunt and I had never been close enough for this. She didn't even know my second name, I'm sure of it. I wanted to call my mother right then, but the air felt too thick, and my voice stayed inside my throat. I untied the strip. The red velvet unfurled softly, dust blooming into the light. Inside was a mirror, small enough to fit in a hand, framed in tarnished gold. The frame was carved with vines that twisted and looped around each other, so intricate that the metal almost looked alive. It reminded me of old church reliquaries, the kind meant to hold bones of saints. For a moment, it reflected nothing. Not the ceiling, not my hands, not the faint afternoon light bleeding through the curtains. It was like looking into water clouded with ash. Then, as if something beneath the surface stirred, my reflection appeared, but slower than it should have. I moved my head left, and the image followed a breath late. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I laughed under my breath, nervous. The light, I told myself. It's always the light. I rewrapped the mirror in its velvet, tied the leather strap again. My name pressed against my thumb like a pulse and slipped it into my backpack. I told no one. That night, the mirror lay in my room, half hidden among books and papers. I meant to forget it, to tell myself I'd imagined everything. But the mind, once it knows where the secret is, keeps circling back. I could feel its presence like static, a soft hum beneath the silence. When I turned off the light, the darkness seemed to have layers, one ordinary, one waiting. Somewhere between them I heard the faintest sound, a single tap, crisp, measured. It came again, softer, from the direction of the bathroom. It could have been anything, a pipe, a settling tile, a moth. But something in me knew it was none of those. I got up barefoot and padded across the cold floor. The moonlight stretched itself thin across the tiles. When I opened the bathroom door, the air inside was colder, as if the room had been left open to some invisible wind. The mirror above the sink was clear, ordinary. My face looked normal in it. Tired, yes, but mine. I waited. The tapping stopped. I turned off the light and went back to bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red velvet, the vines on the frame, the faint delay of my reflection. The human mind is a cruel companion. It feeds on its own fear until the fear begins to taste like truth. Over the next few days, I convinced myself I'd imagined the tapping. I tried to return to routine, work, calls, the dull noise of life. Yet every time I brushed my teeth or washed my face, I found myself watching the mirror too closely, testing it, as if waiting for the lag to return. Sometimes, when the room was dim, I swore my reflection blinked after I did, half a heartbeat, too late. There's a saying my mother used to repeat when I was small. A mirror remembers every face that's ever looked into it. Back then, it sounded poetic. Now, it sounded like a warning. The first real sign that something had followed me home wasn't in sight or sound, but in sleep. I began waking at the same hour, between 3 and 4, with the same sensation, that someone was standing by the bathroom door, not moving, not breathing, just waiting. When I opened my eyes fully, the feeling dissolved like smoke. I stopped sleeping with the lights off. On the 4th night, I woke to a woman's voice. It wasn't singing or speaking. It was murmuring low, rhythmic, like someone reciting words into a cup. The sound came from behind the bathroom door, muffled but close. I sat up, heart rattling in my chest, and listened. The instant I turned on the light, it stopped. The silence afterward was worse. It was the silence of something that knows you've heard it. By morning, I decided I couldn't keep it from my mother anymore. When I told her, she didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. She only said, "Bring it here, but cover it properly." I wrapped the mirror in its velvet again, the way I had found it, and tied the leather strap around it until my name disappeared beneath the knot. When I handed it to her, she held it as if it were a wounded animal, gingerly, deliberately avoiding the glass. "Get in the car. she said. We drove without speaking. The air outside had that heavy warmth before a storm, the kind that presses on your ears. The road led us back to my aunt's house, where the black ribbon still fluttered weakly against the gate. My mother walked straight through the garden, past the cracked tiles, to the far corner where a fig tree grew, its roots thick, its branches heavy with shadows. She knelt, dug into the earth with her bare hands until the soil stained her palms, and placed the wrapped mirror into the hollow she had made. Then she covered it again, pressing the dirt flat, set a stone on top, and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. When she stood, she looked older, paler. "Those were your aunt's things," she said quietly. "They belong here. Don't ask again." We left without another word. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept dreamlessly. But just before I drifted off, a thought passed through me, light and cold. What if we didn't bury it deep enough? What if someone else finds it, unwraps it, and sees their name carved in the leather? Peace is a liar. It arrives softly, wearing your mother's perfume and your own exhaustion, and for a few nights you think you've outlived the thing that frightened you. After we buried the mirror, my life fell into a rhythm again. I went to work. I answered calls. The house was quiet in a way that felt earned. I told myself that whatever had followed me from my aunt's room, whatever lived behind the glass, was finally gone. But there are silences that don't mean peace. There are silences that are only a breath drawn before the next word. The first time I realized something was wrong again, it was late, almost 3 in the morning. I woke without knowing why. The apartment was still, the hum of the refrigerator faint through the walls. But the air had a weight to it, as though someone had exhaled and never breathed in again. Then I heard it, barely a whisper, a sound just above the hum of the night, a woman's voice. She wasn't singing or crying, she was speaking, but the words melted together like water over glass. The sound came from the direction of the bathroom, the same place as before. It was impossible, I told myself. We had buried it. The mirror was gone, locked under earth and stone and my mother's whispered prayer. Still, the voice threaded through the dark like smoke. I turned on the light. Instantly, the sound stopped. Silence filled the space again, but it was not an ordinary silence. It felt deliberate, like a game that waits for your next move. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the closed bathroom door, my hand shaking around the switch. Then I did something that still shames me. I spoke. "Please," I said softly. "If you're here, don't." It wasn't courage. It was instinct. And the worst part was that I thought I heard an answer. Not in words, but in the faint settling of the tiles, like a sigh pressed against the floor. In the morning, I called my mother. I didn't tell her everything. I said only that I couldn't sleep, that I still felt watched. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come for lunch and bring nothing with you." At her house, the air smelled of basil and the sea wind that slipped through the shutters. She served soup and bread, simple things, grounding things. When I finished eating, she asked, "Did you dream?" "No," I said. "Just woke up hearing something." She nodded slowly as if she had expected that answer. "Some doors close only after the 3rd night," she said. "If they were opened in the wrong way, you have to help them shut. Otherwise, they remember you." Her calm made me angry. "You knew about it," I said. "About what she kept." My mother's eyes didn't flinch. "Your aunt believed she could contain sorrow," she said. "She thought grief could be trapped the way light is trapped in glass. That's what mirrors were for, long before they were vanity. They catch what tries to escape." I didn't understand. "So what did I see? What was it?" "She called it her twin," my mother said. "She thought everyone had one, the version that stays behind in every reflection we leave. When she was young, she tried to summon hers. Maybe she succeeded." I stared at her. The soup turned heavy in my stomach. "And you buried it like that was enough?" She smiled, but it was a sad, tired smile. "It's never enough. but we do what we can. That night I returned home with a new kind of dread, quieter and deeper than fear. It wasn't the mirror anymore that haunted me. It was the thought of my aunt, sitting before it night after night, whispering to a version of herself that might have learned to answer back. For weeks after that, nothing happened. Or maybe I simply refused to notice. I slept with the radio on, volume low, tuned between stations so that the static filled the room like snow. The voice never returned, until one evening, near the end of summer. I was cleaning the kitchen when I heard a sound from the window, 3 quick knocks like fingernails on glass. I froze. My building is on the 5th floor. No one could be there. But the sound came again, louder, and this time I felt it in my bones as if the vibration passed through the air and settled behind my ribs. When I finally forced myself to look, there was nothing outside, only my reflection in the glass, my own face hovering over the faint lights of the city. For a second, I thought I saw movement, a delay, the smallest fraction of a second, but enough to make me step back. The next morning, I drove back to my aunt's old house. The black ribbons had long been taken down, the yard overgrown, the fig tree spreading its roots across the soil like veins. I brought flowers, though I didn't know for whom. My mother met me there, already waiting with a small shovel in her hand. "I thought we buried it deep," she said quietly. "So did I whispered. We dug carefully, hands trembling as the earth gave way. When the shovel struck stone, we paused. The velvet bundle lay just as we had left it, untouched. But when my mother lifted it, the leather strap fell apart in her hand, split clean through as if cut, not rotted. I felt the breath leave my lungs. My mother stared at it for a long time, then placed it back, wrapped it again, and covered it with soil. This time she drew a circle around the spot with salt and murmured words I had never heard before. Not a prayer exactly, but close. "Now it's closed," she said. We stood in silence under the fig tree. The wind moved through the branches with a sound like distant whispering. I wanted to believe it was just the leaves. I wanted to believe everything was finally over. On the drive home, I asked, "Did you hear her too?" My mother didn't look at me. She just pressed her lips together, and in that silence, I knew the answer. That night, I slept without dreams again. Yet before dawn, as the city began to stir, I thought I heard something soft beneath the hum of traffic. A sigh, long and patient, as if from under the ground. I told myself it was only the wind, but the lie tasted like earth. My grandfather's stories always began the same way, with silence. He would sit in his worn armchair, his coffee cooling between his palms, and wait until the sea wind crept in through the cracks of the old house. Only when it sighed against the walls would he begin to speak, his voice low, more like remembering than telling. He used to live in a small coastal town that no one ever talks about by name. Not out of secrecy, he said, but because names invite memory, and some memories shouldn't be called back. Every place has its own ghosts, he told me once, but some belong to the living. I was young when he first said that, too young to understand, but old enough to remember the way his eyes looked when he did. The town, as he described it, was the kind of place that forgets time. The air smelled of salt and diesel. The wind carried the cries of gulls that never seemed to land, and the houses leaned together as though bracing against something invisible. Each had its own story, but there was one house everyone avoided, not out of cruelty, not even out of curiosity, out of a quiet, shared agreement, an unspoken rule. At the edge of a dirt road that led straight to the sea stood a house built from weathered wood and patched tin. It wasn't abandoned, but it looked as though it wished it were. Its paint peeled in long, pale curls. The windows were covered by heavy curtains even in daylight. The man who lived there had arrived years earlier with a woman he called his wife. No one knew where they came from, and no one asked. In a town like that, questions were a kind of impoliteness that could curse you. My grandfather said the man was quiet, hard-working, but guarded. His eyes sharp and watchful, as if every glance from a neighbor were an intrusion. He repaired nets, mended boats, kept to himself. The woman, in the beginning, was seen often on the porch, her skin pale beneath a black shawl. She would sit facing the sea, motionless for hours, and sometimes the townsfolk would hear her humming, a sound as thin as thread, as if she were trying to remember a song from another life. Then, one day, she stopped appearing. The man told the baker's wife that his wife had fallen ill, that the sun hurt her skin, that she could no longer walk. He built a small shade in the yard with sheets of canvas and sat her there sometimes, hidden from sight. And though no one admitted it aloud, everyone began to notice that the air near that end of the road felt different. Thicker, heavier, like the hush inside a church right before confession. That was when the noises began. It happened first on a night so hot and still that even the sea seemed to hold its breath. My grandfather and a few of his friends were sitting by the shore drinking cheap rum and talking nonsense when they heard it. Faint at first, carried by the wind. A woman's voice, not crying, not screaming, but a long, wavering moan that seemed to come from deep inside the earth. They froze. The sound went on for almost a minute before fading into the waves. The next morning, no one mentioned it. In small towns, silence is how fear keeps its dignity. But when the sound came again a week later, louder, clearer, people started to whisper. Some said the man's wife was dying. Others swore she was already dead and that he couldn't let her go. The children were warned not to walk that road after dark. My grandfather said the strange part wasn't the voice itself, it was how it changed the town. People stopped meeting in the square after sundown. Fishermen avoided setting nets near the shore. Even the dogs refused to wander close to that house. It was as if the sound carried a sickness that spread through the air, invisible but contagious. Months passed. The voice would vanish, then return, always when the moon was small. No one dared check on the woman. The man's face grew hollow, his eyes sunken, and he began to talk to himself when he came into town for supplies. Once, when my grandfather was delivering nets, he saw him standing by the shore, speaking to the waves in a language that wasn't Spanish or anything he recognized. "Let her rest," my grandfather called to him, trying to sound kind. The man turned and smiled, in a way that wasn't a smile. "She isn't resting," he said. "She's waiting." That night the voice came again, closer this time, as if it were no longer coming from the house but from the air itself. Some said it was the sea mourning one of its own. Others whispered about the encierro, an old superstition that if a person dies without being properly blessed, their soul clings to the last body that loved them. And if that body refuses to let go, the soul begins to decay into something else, something that no longer remembers being human. My grandfather never told this part without lowering his voice. He said that around that time, the man stopped coming into town altogether. People began to avoid his road entirely. But even from the far end of the village, you could hear the voice at night, sometimes calling, sometimes begging, always unfinished. One evening, my grandfather decided to see for himself. He was young then, reckless in the way only those who don't yet believe in consequences can be. He walked the long path alone, the sea glinting cold under the moonlight. When he reached the house, he saw the man sitting outside, motionless. "What do you want?" the man asked without turning his head. My grandfather didn't answer. He was staring at the door, which was open just a crack. Inside, he thought he saw something. Pale fabric, a shadow, a hint of movement. And then the sound began again. Not from within the house, but from somewhere behind it. A long, trembling moan, full of something he could only describe as hunger. He ran. He didn't stop until he reached his own door, and even then he could still hear the sound echoing in his bones. Years later, when he told me this story, he said that sound never really left him. It lived in the sea wind, in the creak of wooden floors, in the hush between breaths. "There are voices," he said, that don't belong to the dead or the living. They belong to what's left over. He took a slow sip of his coffee then, his hands trembling slightly. And some of them, he added, learn how to travel. It was years before my grandfather learned what had really been inside that house. By then, the moaning had become part of the town's nights, one of those sounds that people tried to forget by pretending it was ordinary. The wind through the tin, they would say. The sea inside the shells. But everyone knew it wasn't. Then one morning, long after dawn, the man from that house collapsed in the marketplace. He was carrying a sack of fish. He dropped it before anyone could speak. He fell without a sound, just folded in on himself as if the air had been pulled out of him. My grandfather was there. He said the man's eyes were open, but it was like looking into two holes cut into paper, no light behind them. A few people gathered around. Someone splashed water on his face. A woman muttered, "He's cursed." Another said, "He's just old." They were all wrong. He wasn't old. He was hollow. When he finally came back to himself, he didn't speak. He just looked around, confused, murmuring something no one could understand. Then he fainted again. The baker's wife said, "We should tell his wife." No one wanted to go, but no one wanted to say so out loud. So three of them went together, the baker's wife, an older fisherman, and my grandfather, because he was young and strong enough to help if something was wrong. They took the dirt road, and as they walked, the air grew colder. The sun felt thin, as if it didn't want to touch that place. By the time they reached the gate, the smell hit them. A stale dampness, old fabric, and sea rot. The yard was overgrown. The canvas shade flapped weakly in the wind. They called out, "Señora." No answer. They called again. My grandfather said the sound of his own voice scared him. It didn't echo back, just vanished. So the baker's wife, braver than both men, stepped through the gate and went up to the door. "She's in the yard," she whispered. The woman was sitting in her wheelchair beneath the shade, facing away from them. Her head was covered with a faded cloth. Her hands rested on her lap, folded neatly. For a moment, she looked peaceful, too peaceful. My grandfather said he took one step forward. He felt his stomach drop before he even saw her face. "Señora," the baker's wife said gently, "your husband fell ill. She reached out to touch the woman's shoulder. The skin beneath her fingers was dry, rigid, like bark. She pulled back instinctively, then lifted the cloth just a little. The scream she made, my grandfather said, did not sound human. He saw it too, the face beneath the veil, skin shriveled and cracked, eyes sunk deep and dry, lips sealed to the jaw by something that might once have been a handkerchief. It wasn't bones, it wasn't rot, it was something preserved. He told me later that it didn't smell like death, it smelled like dust and salt, and the dampness of things kept too long behind doors. A body that had forgotten it was supposed to end. They left quietly, backing away as if afraid that any sudden movement might break her. They didn't run, they walked, trembling, hearts pounding. No one wanted to be the first to say what they had seen. By the time they reached the market again, the man was gone. Someone had taken him in a truck toward the hospital in the city. Later they said he'd been admitted to the psychiatric ward. That was the end of him, as far as the town was concerned. But the end of him wasn't the end of it. That night, when the sun went down, people stayed up listening. The air was heavy, the sea unusually still. And then it came, the same voice, the same long, trembling wail that stretched through the streets. Except this time, everyone knew the woman was dead. The sound didn't come from her throat. It came from somewhere else, from the space she had once filled, from the air that remembered her suffering. My grandfather said that was the first night the whole town believed. He told me the sound was different now, clearer, angrier. The dogs barked until they choked. Mothers pulled their children into bed. Even the church bells rang once without being touched, and then it stopped. But the stillness afterward was worse. You could feel it crawling through the walls, searching for a place to settle. Over the next few days, the rumors changed shape. Some said the woman had been a witch, that she had trapped her soul inside her body and refused to leave. Others said the man had done something terrible, that he'd made a pact, that he'd promised to keep her alive long after she'd stopped breathing. A few believed something simpler, that grief had driven him mad. My grandfather never committed to one version. He said only that certain things have a way of repeating themselves until someone breaks the pattern. When he went back to the house weeks later, the door was ajar. He didn't go in, but he could see the faint marks on the floor, circles drawn in what looked like salt, symbols etched into the wood with a knife, and in the middle of the room, under a shaft of sunlight, stood the wheelchair empty. The canvas shade outside flapped softly in the wind, though there was no wind strong enough to move it. He closed the door and left it that way. That was the night he began to pray again, though he told me he never quite knew to whom. Years later, when he shared the story with me, he rubbed the edge of his cup and said, "She wasn't crying, you know. That's what I remember most. It wasn't sorrow, it was command. Like she wanted someone to finish what he started." He paused, his eyes far away. "And I think," he whispered, "someone eventually did." My grandfather said that not long after the man was taken away, something strange began to happen in the town. For a while, the voice vanished, and people dared to believe it was over. But then, just when they started leaving their doors open again at night, it returned, stronger, closer, as if it had found new lungs. At first, they thought the sound came from the sea. The fishermen swore they could hear it beneath the water, echoing up through their nets, a woman's moan tangled with the current. The sound would rise and fall with the tide, like something breathing. The town priest, Father Morales, said it was the devil testing their faith, but even he refused to walk down the road to the house after sunset. My grandfather remembered one night especially. He and 3 friends had been drinking cheap rum behind the church when they heard it again. 3 long cries, rising in pitch until the glass bottles around them seemed to vibrate. "It's coming from the old house," one of them said. The others nodded, but no one moved. Finally, an older man named Esteban, half drunk and tired of fear, stood up. "I'll go," he said. "If it's the wind, I'll prove it." They tried to stop him, but Esteban was already walking toward the shore. My grandfather followed at a distance, too ashamed to let him go alone. The road was black, the moon hidden behind clouds. The air stank of salt and rot. As they neared the house, the sound grew clearer, a woman's voice muttering something rhythmic, almost like a chant. Esteban gripped the gate and whispered a prayer that came out slurred. When they stepped inside, the smell hit them first, something metallic and sharp, like blood left too long in a bowl. The windows were shuttered, but faint light flickered from within. Candles, dozens of them, their wax melting down to pale puddles on the floor. On the walls were symbols drawn in salt, circles intersecting triangles, crude shapes like eyes, and lines that spiraled inward until they vanished at the center. "Madre de Dios," Esteban breathed. "What is this?" Then they saw the figure. At first, my grandfather thought it was a statue, a woman's shape seated in the middle of the room. But when he looked closer, he saw it was made of things that shouldn't have been there. Sticks bound with wire, rags soaked in something dark, and in the place of a face, a piece of cracked mirror tied to the frame. He felt something in his chest pull tight. "Let's go," he said. But Esteban didn't move. The man was staring into the mirror, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, all at once, the candlelight dimmed. The air shuddered. From the far corner came a sound like breath dragged through water. They ran. When they reached the street again, Esteban was shaking. "She spoke to me," he kept saying. "She asked for him. She wants him to finish it." He left town 2 days later. My grandfather never saw him again. After that night, people began to talk about what the man in the hospital had said before he disappeared. The story spread in fragments, each version worse than the last. But the piece that remained the same was this: he had confessed that the woman in his house wasn't his wife. He'd met her years ago in another village, a stranger who claimed she could heal the sick through ancient rites. She told him she would make his life whole, that she would keep him safe from the sea. But when his real wife and children vanished, he didn't remember how or why. Only that one day, he woke up beside the stranger and couldn't leave. She told him she was dying, but that her death would not be the end. She gave him instructions written in her own blood, how to keep her body intact, how to seal the house, how to feed the ritual that would allow her to return. 7 years, she said. You must guard me 7 years, then I will come back through the body. He did as he was told. He salted the walls, burned incense made of bones and herbs he couldn't name, and sealed every window. When the townspeople came close, he chased them away, and when she finally died, he stayed beside her waiting. But something went wrong. He said that on the 7th night after her death, he heard her voice, not from the body but from the air, from the sea, from everywhere. She begged to be finished, to be freed. And when he couldn't bear it anymore, when the sound filled his head like waves, he lost his mind. That was what he told the orderlies in the hospital. They wrote, delusional, psychotic episode, grief hallucinations. But one of them, a nurse from the coast, refused to stay in his room after dark. She said she could hear whispering from under his bed, like a woman counting slowly in another language. When the man finally died, if he died, no one from the town went to claim the body. The authorities sealed his house with yellow tape, padlocked the door, and nailed wooden boards over the windows. But still, the sounds continued. A year later, a priest from another parish came to bless the place. He arrived at noon with a bucket of holy water and 2 altar boys. My grandfather stood far back near the road and watched. The priest walked around the house, sprinkling water and muttering Latin verses. Then he drew a cross on the door with chalk and left a candle burning on the step. That night, the voice returned louder than ever, one long wail that began as grief and ended as rage. It rolled through the town like thunder, shaking walls, rattling glass, making even the sea retreat. The next morning, the candle was gone. The chalk cross had been smeared away. A week later, men from the municipality came with chains and locks. They sealed the place for good, warning children not to play nearby. My grandfather said that after that, the town grew quiet again. But it was a hollow kind of quiet. The kind that comes when something is no longer trying to be heard because it's already inside you. He leaned back in his chair when he told me this, his coffee untouched. You see, he said softly, the dead don't always want to rest. Sometimes they just want witnesses. I asked him what happened to the house. He smiled a thin, tired smile. They locked the door, he said, but a lock only keeps out the living. Years later, long after my grandfather died and the town had begun to slip from memory like a name you once knew, I decided to find it. It wasn't impulse, it was compulsion. I told myself it was curiosity, a way to close the circle of his stories. But I think, deep down, I wanted to hear that voice for myself. The road to the coast was smaller than I remembered from his descriptions. The map didn't even list the town anymore. The old route had been swallowed by a new highway that ran further inland. I parked near what looked like the remains of a pier, eaten by rust and salt, and walked until the air changed. Heavier, wetter, filled with that same electric stillness that lives in the mouth of storms. The sea was gray, the sky was gray, the world felt drained of every other color. And there, at the end of a dirt road lined with mangroves, stood the house. It was smaller than I'd imagined, slouched into itself, its roof patched with new tin that already looked old. The boards on the windows had warped and split, leaving narrow slits like eyes that refused to close. A padlock still hung on the door, though it had long since rusted through. I stood there for a long time, unsure what to feel. Part of me wanted to go inside, part of me wanted to burn it down. Instead, I walked the perimeter, tracing the outline of the fence. The air smelled of salt, metal, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long on a grave. Each step sank slightly into the damp soil, and beneath my boots I could hear the dull squelch of roots, worms, decay. There were no other houses nearby, no voices, no sound except the slow drag of the sea. And then, so soft I almost missed it, the wind changed. It came from the back of the house, a shift so gentle it could have been my imagination. But with it came a scent I recognized immediately, though I'd never smelled it before. Dust and wax and something faintly like dried blood. I froze. The sound followed. Not a cry this time, not the long wail my grandfather described. Just a sigh, a single exhale that seemed to come from the ground itself. It was enough to make my throat close. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. Instead, I found myself walking toward the source, around to the back of the house. There was a patch of bare earth there, ringed with broken stones. In the center lay the remnants of a small wooden chair, eaten by termites. A few feet away, buried halfway in the dirt, something caught the light, a shard of glass. I crouched and brushed it free. It was a piece of mirror, its edges dulled by sand, its surface clouded with grime. When I tilted it, the sunlight glanced off it just enough for me to see a reflection. Only it wasn't mine. For the briefest moment, the glass showed a pair of eyes, not human eyes. Eyes that were too dark, too hollow, and far too close. I dropped it. It didn't shatter. It simply sank back into the soil, as if the earth had been waiting to take it. The air around me thickened. I heard a low hum, not quite sound, not quite silence, the same pressure in the ears you feel before a storm. Then came the voice. It didn't wail this time. It whispered. I couldn't make out words, but I felt them in my bones. Finish it. I stumbled back, tripping over the roots, my heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else. The whisper followed me to the gate, then stopped the instant I stepped outside it. When I looked back, the sea had gone still. The house seemed smaller again, innocent almost, like a ruin pretending to sleep. I drove away without looking in the mirrors. For days after, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing. Hallucination, adrenaline, the power of stories. I repeated those words like prayer beads. But each night I dreamed of that sigh, how it came from beneath the soil, how it shaped itself into something almost like my own breath. One evening, I told my mother where I'd gone. She didn't scold me, she just closed her eyes as if she had expected this. "You shouldn't have gone back," she said. "It's not your story to finish." "What was it really?" I asked. "What was she?" She hesitated. "A wound that learned to speak." Those words followed me for weeks. They sounded like poetry, but they weren't. They were truth. Because a few nights later, I woke up with the taste of salt in my mouth and the smell of earth on my hands, as if I'd been digging in my sleep. I turned on the light. At the foot of my bed lay a faint smear of dirt, the kind that clings to the soles of shoes. And on my nightstand, there was a small, dull piece of glass I had never seen before. I don't know how it got there. I don't remember bringing it back. But when I held it up to the light, the surface flickered. Not showing my reflection, not showing anything at all, just a dark ripple, like breath fogging from the other side. I wrapped it in a cloth without touching the glass and placed it in a box. It's still there. Sometimes when the nights are heavy and the wind carries that same low hum my grandfather once described, I hear it tapping from inside the box, soft, patient, the rhythm of something that knows it has all the time in the world. Before everything, the mirror, the house, the whispers, there was a simpler story. Or maybe it only looked simple because I was a child then, still believing that fear was something you could shake off like rain. It was the year of the church fair, and I was 10 years old. My brother Victor was 12. We were altar boys, dutiful, proud in our white cassocks and red collars, helping our grandmother polish the candlesticks and set flowers for the saints. 2 days before the festival, the air around the plaza began to buzz with excitement. The rides arrived, carousels with chipped paint, booths for cotton candy, the scent of frying oil and sugar drifting through the streets. Children ran barefoot, chasing the trucks that carried the iron skeletons of the machines. Everything smelled like rust, sweat, and anticipation. That afternoon, while helping our grandmother at the temple, I saw my brother and a group of boys playing behind the stage where the choir usually stood. They were huddled in a circle, whispering. When I went closer, one of them looked up and grinned. "Wanna play, Nina?" he said. "What game?" "Pinky Pinky." I had never heard the name, but the way they said it made it sound forbidden, like a spell. They showed me a coin, worn in copper, balanced on a piece of cardboard with the words yes and no scrawled on either side. One boy explained the rules as if reciting scripture. You ask a question, you flip the coin. Heads means yes, tails means no. Simple. Too simple. I laughed. "That's it? It only works if you ask permission first," one of them said. "You have to say, 'Pinky Pinky, may I enter your game?' If the coin says yes, you play. If it says no, you walk away." My brother frowned. "Don't, Clara. You're scared of everything." I should have listened to him, but the boys were watching, and I was tired of being the timid one. So I knelt beside them, feeling the wooden platform creak beneath my knees, and said the words. "Pinky Pinky, may I enter your game?" The coin spun, caught the light, and fell, heads up. The boys went silent. One whispered, "It never says yes the first time." I smiled, pretending not to feel the chill that slid up my spine. We asked silly questions at first. Will it rain tonight? Will the priest forget his sermon again? The coin answered as if alive, quick, decisive. Every time it hit the wood, the sound was too loud, too deliberate. Then I asked something I still don't understand. Maybe curiosity, maybe some small, cruel impulse to prove the game false. "Pinky Pinky, will I have an accident soon?" The coin clattered and landed heads up. "Yes." The boys laughed uneasily. I forced a smile. "In a bouncy castle?" I asked. The coin said no. "In a ride?" It said yes. And then, barely whispering, I asked, "Will I die?" It said no. "Will I go to the hospital?" Yes. The laughter died completely. The air felt heavier, the way it does before thunder. I remember one of the boys whispering, "Close it. You have to close it." To end the game, each of us had to ask for permission to leave. One by one, the coin gave them yes. When it came to me, it flipped. Tails. No. I tried again. No. Again. No. By the fifth time, I could barely breathe. My brother grabbed the coin, said the words for me, and flipped it himself. Still no. That's when we decided to bury it. We were standing on holy ground after all. Maybe the earth of the church would cleanse whatever we had awakened. The boys dug a small hole beneath the fig tree in the atrium, dropped the coin inside, and covered it with dust and a handful of salt stolen from the rectory's kitchen. We promised not to tell anyone. By evening, the festival had begun. Laughter, music, the bright stench of fried dough. The rides glowed like mechanical saints, flashing lights, loud music, metal screeching against metal. My brother and I begged our mother for tickets. She smiled, exhausted but indulgent, and gave us enough for one ride. I chose the kangaroo, a round contraption with seats shaped like rabbits, bouncing and spinning with manic joy. We climbed in, the chains cool against our wrists. The operator, a man with tired eyes, pulled the lever, and the world began to whirl. At first it was thrilling, the wind, the laughter, the flash of colored bulbs. But then I noticed the music had changed. The speakers crackled, distorting the melody until it sounded like voices, not singing, chanting. The ride spun faster. The chain strained. My brother shouted something, but I couldn't hear him. Then there was a metallic snap. One of the chains broke, the seat jolted upward, my body lifting off the metal. For a split second, I was weightless, suspended between fear and disbelief. My brother grabbed my arm. "Hold on!" he screamed. And then I fell. It wasn't like falling, it was like floating through darkness thick enough to taste. I didn't see the fair anymore, only shadows that moved without sound. And somewhere in that blackness I heard laughter. Not the laughter of children, not the laughter of anyone living. It came in layers. First one voice, then too many to count, all laughing together. And beneath them, something else, a sound like hooves dragging across stone. A shape stepped forward, human shoulders, the head of a goat, horns curling back like knives, its mouth stretched, too wide, into something that might have been a smile. I couldn't scream. Then came the second snap, the moment reality reclaimed me. My body hit something hard and the world rushed back in a blur of screams and light. The ride had stopped. I was on the ground, blood in my mouth, my leg burning with pain so sharp it felt clean. Someone shouted for help. My brother's face hovered over mine, pale and wet with tears. "Don't sleep," he kept saying. "Please don't sleep." But all I wanted was to close my eyes. They carried me to a truck. There were no ambulances that night, and drove to the nearest hospital. I remember the smell of gasoline, the sting of blood, the taste of copper on my tongue. I remember trying to stay awake as the engine roared. And over it all, I still heard that laughter, fainter now but still following, echoing in the corners of my skull. The hospital lights were so white they hurt. They peeled every color off the world, made faces look like masks, eyes like holes. Someone was shouting, my name maybe, or a prayer, but the sound came from far away, underwater. I remember the smell before anything else, antiseptic, iron, and that strange sweetness that clings to pain. They slid me onto a gurney. My brother tried to follow, but someone held him back. The wheels squealed across the tile. I could see the ceiling lights pass over me one by one, each flare pulsing through my open eyes like the beat of a heart. Then I saw her. At the end of the corridor stood a figure in black, a woman, or the shape of one. Her head slightly tilted, her face hidden by shadow. I blinked, and she was gone. The doctor's voice snapped me back. "Stay with us, sweetheart. Don't sleep." I wanted to answer, but my mouth wouldn't move. Inside my head, something whispered, "You asked for it." The darkness came and went in waves. Each time I surfaced, there were hands on me, voices counting, the sting of needles. Once, I felt someone sewing my skin, the thread pulling tight. Another time, I heard my mother crying somewhere nearby. But between those waves, in the hollow places where the pain dissolved, I was back in that other place, the one without gravity. The air was thick and gray, like dust suspended in water, and the laughter was there again. I saw the creature more clearly now. Tall, lean, its skin the color of burned paper. The head was unmistakably that of a goat, but its mouth was wrong. It was too human. It watched me the way a collector might look at something newly acquired. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into my chest. "You opened it," it said. "Now you keep it open." I don't remember what happened after, only that I screamed until my throat bled. When I woke again, it was daylight. My mother sat beside me, her eyes swollen. "You're safe," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. My leg was wrapped in bandages. My brother stood in the corner, still in the same clothes from the night before. His hands were shaking. I asked him what had happened, but he wouldn't look at me. "You don't remember," he whispered. Bits came back in flashes. The chain breaking, the wind, his hand slipping from mine. But what stayed sharp was the laughter. "I saw it," I said softly. He nodded. "Me too." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The monitor beside my bed beeped steadily, marking the seconds that the world was still ordinary. A nurse came to change the dressing on my leg. She told me the wound had missed the bone by a miracle. I wanted to tell her there was no miracle, only debt. That night, when my mother went home to rest, I woke to the sound of someone breathing near the curtain. Not the nurse, not a doctor. This was heavier, slower, like an animal sleeping on a cold floor. I didn't dare move. I could feel it, whatever it was, just beyond the fabric. Then the breathing stopped and a smell rolled over me, earth and salt and something faintly sweet. The same scent I'd known at the house by the sea. A voice whispered right against my ear. Still mine. The next morning they said I'd been muttering in my sleep, clawing at the sheets. My brother refused to stay in the room again. He told my mother later that he'd seen a shadow crouched by my bed. Something with horns that dissolved when the lights came on. I healed eventually. The scar on my leg stayed, pale and thin, like a thread sewn into my skin. Life went on, or at least pretended to. The fair returned the next year, though the kangaroo ride never did. The priest blessed the grounds twice as long, but even the holy water dried fast in the heat. We never spoke of the game again. The coin remained buried beneath the fig tree, and we let it stay there, convinced that as long as it wasn't disturbed, nothing else would come through. For years, I managed to forget. Or maybe forgetting was another form of protection. I grew up, left the town, moved to the city. I learned to live among mirrors and glass and noise so constant that silence itself felt unnatural. But every October, always October, I'd wake one night to that same faint laughter. Sometimes it was only in dreams. Sometimes it was waiting when I opened my eyes. Then, 2 months ago, it came back. A friend of mine, unaware of any of this, stayed the night in my apartment. The next morning, she looked pale, shaken. She said she'd had sleep paralysis, that she couldn't move, couldn't speak. "But I saw something," she whispered. "A shadow standing beside your bed. It was tall, with horns." She left before sunset that day and never came back. Now I lie awake more often than I sleep. Sometimes I think I can hear the tapping again, soft, patient, like fingernails against glass. Other nights it's the sigh, the one that comes from the ground. I've stopped looking for the source. Whatever it is, it doesn't need to be found. It already knows where I am. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window and notice it lag just for a heartbeat. When that happens, I turn off the lights and whisper what my mother once told me, though I'm no longer sure it helps. There are things we do not touch, even if we do not believe in them. And yet, belief or not, something keeps touching back. It's strange how stories don't end when you stop telling them. They live on, reshaping themselves in the silence that follows. I used to think the 3 things that marked my life, the mirror, the house, and the coin, were separate accidents strung together by superstition. Now I understand they were never apart. They were parts of the same design, a pattern that began long before me, long before my aunt or my grandfather's town. Lately, the nights have started to breathe again. I hear it every time the clock drips past 3. That soft rhythm of something old and patient moving through the dark. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. The sound lives in the spaces between thoughts, the kind of whisper you don't hear with your ears but with your blood. Sometimes I dream that I'm back in my aunt's house. The red velvet cloth is on the dresser, only now the mirror inside it isn't hidden. It's open, gleaming faintly in the dark. I see my name on the strap again, freshly carved, the edges still bleeding gold dust, and beside it, half buried in the dust of the floorboards, a small copper coin. It spins by itself, lazily, as if waiting for a question. The voice comes from behind me, my mother's voice, or maybe my aunt's, or maybe they've always been the same. "Everything buried finds its way to the surface," it says. You know that. When I wake, my chest aches with the weight of those words. The small box where I hid the shard of glass still sits on my shelf. I've never opened it since the night I sealed it, though sometimes I see the faintest shimmer leaking from the seams, like light trapped underwater. I've thought about throwing it into the sea, burning it, burying it again, but I know better now. Things like this don't disappear when you destroy them. They only move. The house by the sea, the mirror beneath the fig tree, the coin under the church. They are the same vessel in three forms: glass, salt, and metal. My aunt thought she could contain sorrow inside a mirror. The man thought he could hold love inside a body. I thought I could bury fear under holy earth. We were all wrong. What we buried were doors, and doors never stay closed forever. A few nights ago, I heard tapping again. 3 knocks, like before. Only this time it came from the inside of the box. I didn't move, I just listened. Between the taps, there was a low hum, almost a voice trying to shape a word. Then silence. When I finally gathered the courage to approach it, I noticed something else. The thin line of salt I'd poured along my window months ago had shifted. Some of it was gone, smudged away, as if something had brushed past it from the inside. I haven't slept since. Tonight, as I write this, the room is very still. The city outside is asleep, but the darkness feels awake. I keep glancing at the mirror across the room, the one above the sink. I can't help it. The more I try not to look, the more I feel it looking back. It's faint at first, the smallest delay, a flicker like a heartbeat. But then my reflection begins to breathe on its own. My chest rises a fraction after hers. My eyes blink a beat too late. She is almost me, but not quite. She's waiting for something. When I turn away, I catch a blur in the corner of my eye. The shape of a woman, thin and long, with a shawl that trails like smoke. I tell myself it's a trick of light, but the air moves when she does. I whisper my mother's warning again. There are things we do not touch, even if we do not believe in them. The reflection smiles. And that's when I finally understand what my grandfather meant when he said some voices learn to travel. They move through mirrors, through names, through the gaps in stories. They survive by being told, by being heard. Every listener is a new doorway. You listening now, reading this, you felt it, haven't you? That brief pause after a noise, the way your own reflection seems too still, the feeling that something stands just behind you, not threatening, just waiting to be remembered. If you hear tapping tonight, ignore it. If you wake to a sigh near your ear, don't answer. And if by some terrible coincidence you find an old mirror wrapped in red cloth or a coin with one side darker than the other, don't touch it. Don't even look. Because stories like this don't end. They replicate. They find new voices to finish what others began. The last time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the sea again. The house was gone, washed away by years and salt. But beneath the sand, I could still see the glint of glass, the curve of a coin, the shimmer of something golden, catching the last light before sinking. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. Like watching a wound heal over something still alive. And somewhere just under the surface, I heard her voice, soft, gentle, familiar. It's your turn now. Then came the sound of fingernails against glass. Once, twice, patient as always.